Here's our review of the Xbox Series X. Console war never changes, but thankfully the consoles do. Welcome to our review of the Xbox Series X. This teraflop-filled bad boy hits store shelves on November 10th and officially kicks off the next generation of console gaming, which is basically becoming PC gaming with less RGB and more couches. Now, if you prefer to read this kind of thing, I'll leave a version of this review on Nerdist.com as well, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now that said, let's cut to the chase. The Xbox Series X is an incredibly powerful, surprisingly thick console that feels and plays like the next generation of video gaming, even if it looks like a mini fridge, cosplaying as the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, the leap may not seem as glaring and gigantic at first glance as the jump from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One, but from lightning-fast load times to incredible graphical fidelity, the Xbox Series X is well worth your hard-earned money if you're in a position to upgrade your console, especially if you have a sickness for thickness and an appropriately sized entertainment center. Now, the most striking feature of the Xbox Series X isn't how good everything looks or the subtle changes to the controller that make it feel better in your hand, it's how quickly everything runs and loads. The Xbox Series X's much touted velocity architecture and solid-state drive, they reduce load time significantly, letting you get into the game faster. That also effectively means the death of loading screen tooltips unless you're like really good at speed reading. Like really good. While the speed with which individual games load is dependent on the software itself, every title I tested, from next-gen titles like Yakuza Like a Dragon to optimized current-gen games like Gears 5 to Xbox 360 titles like Mass Effect, they all loaded very quickly. Even titles like Grand Theft Auto 5, which has load times long enough for you to like cook a 3-course meal during, loading that from the home screen of the Series X to getting in-game, significantly faster than anything I've ever experienced on console. Now, equally impressive is the Xbox Series X's Quick Resume feature. It lets you run multiple games at the same time and switch between them in a matter of seconds, resuming right where you left off. Even after turning the console off, going to bed, and starting it fresh in the morning, Quick Resume let me continue turning my enemies in Gears 5 into a fine red mist like nothing had ever happened. I did run into some issues on occasion where the feature would not load back into a particular game, or I had to restart my console, but those were far and few between. As with any newer technology, your mileage may vary, but for the most part, it worked seamlessly. Now, the biggest limiting factor here is once again going to be storage. Even with 1 terabyte of storage space, next-gen games are awfully big. That means you're going to have to drop some serious change on an expansion card for additional high-speed SSD storage, especially if you like having a large gaming library at your fingertips. Now, like previous consoles, you can plug in an external hard drive into the console's USB ports, but it won't benefit from the same crazy fast load times as the built-in SSD or that expansion card slot would. It may seem like a minor quibble in the grand scheme of things, but it's worth noting for people who aren't fans of constantly playing Sophie's Choice with your games library. But what about the graphics, Dan? Well, great question, anonymous viewer. The hardware beneath the Xbox Series X is undeniably powerful. It's a beast of a machine, capable of running 60 FPS at 4K and other games at up to 120 FPS. Everything I've played so far looks stunning, and if you want more about the nitty-gritty, about teraflops and whatnot, I suggest looking at places like Digital Foundry. They do a great job with that, but everything I've played looks fantastic. From the way light reflects off of water, to shadows dancing on the walls, to breathtaking little details like the way a character's hair is rendered, the way it flows in the wind. The Xbox Series X is closing the graphical gap between PC gaming and console gaming in a pretty major way. But the problem thus far, and I do use problem pretty loosely, is that it will be difficult to truly assess just how powerful the Xbox Series X is until game developers push the hardware to its limits. Hotly anticipated games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Halo Infinite seem like they'll be better indicators of what this machine can truly do, but they're unfortunately delayed while the devs crunch to the finish line. Now, that said, the difference in nearly every game I've played so far is basically night and day, especially in games like Sea of Thieves or Forza Horizon 4, which are optimized for the Xbox Series X and look the part. What about backwards compatibility? The Xbox 360, the Xbox One, the Xbox One X. Long ago, the 4 console generations, 3.5 console generations lived together in harmony. Then everything changed when the Xbox Series X attacked, our antiquated notions of backwards compatibility for older console generations. Now, one of the biggest selling points of the Xbox Series X for me is the fact that it can play basically any Xbox game ever across all previous console generations. In addition to loading older titles faster than ever, the Series X also automatically adds HDR support to games created well before the existence of HDR support. Even better, it does so without adversely affecting your CPU or GPU's workload. Now, this feature mostly works well. When I tested on Mass Effect, for example, it gave the game a film grain quality almost, making the cutscenes feel even more cinematic. However, the auto HDR blew out certain lighting effects and resulted in a weird motion blur that made me question whether or not it was just a technical error, or maybe I had too much coffee and anxiety swirling around my body and I was vibrating through the fabric of space and time itself. Anyway, my point is that while the feature is definitely a net positive, it might not be a perfect one-to-one fit for every game in that truly sprawling backwards compatible library. Now, what about the new games? Okay, I've got you covered. Speaking of games libraries, let's talk about one of the biggest criticisms I've seen of the Xbox Series X so far. It doesn't have as many exclusives as the PlayStation 5. Well, considering that Microsoft keeps dropping significant chunks of change to buy studios like Bethesda to be a part of their Xbox Game Studios lineup, that feels like a minor complaint in the long run. As next-gen games continue to roll out, we will have a better sense of which console's game library will reign supreme, but if you're the kind of person who wants to play a wide variety of games at launch, well, you can basically play any previous generation game that you own, or you can sign up for Xbox Game Pass, which at the ultimate tier lets you play 100 plus games on your console, Android phone or tablet, and select titles on PC as well. Still, pour one out for no Halo Infinite at launch. Best of luck to all the devs, can't wait to finally play it, but it's a bummer. But let's answer the $499 question. Should you buy this? Well, the answer, I think, is yes. Yes, you should. If you're in a position to upgrade your console, spend that money, and if having the latest and greatest technology is something that's important to you. Your life won't be markedly worse if you keep using your Xbox One, but your user experience will be markedly better if you upgrade to the Xbox Series X. And as with all next-gen console releases, you may be better served waiting till there's more next-gen games, more optimized last-gen titles, and more user data. But if you're the kind of person that's looking for a top-tier video game console that'll let you experience the best of next-generation gaming while playing basically any game that came before it, then you're in luck and you can't go wrong with the Xbox Series X. Now, if you're a die-hard PlayStation fan, this probably isn't going to sway you, but the good news is you can just go buy a PlayStation 5 instead, and stay tuned for our coverage of that console as well. But for $499 for the Series X and $299 for the Series S, Microsoft has created a worthy successor to the Xbox One that raises the bar in all the ways that matter. But tell me, what questions do you still have about the Series X? Which next-gen console do you plan on purchasing, and why? And which next-gen game are you most excited to play? Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.